whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. Please be seated. This past Tuesday, I stepped out of my office at some point in the afternoon into a world that was filled with this sort of ethereal, almost apocalyptic haze. The light refracted through the smoke that was kept overhead by a heat dome effect. Something that I'm sure you all experienced yourselves wherever you were. That moment of realizing that the light was coming at an unearthly orange-yellow glow. Wondering what was going on, looking up to see the sun silhouetted as this red ball against the haze overhead. That sensation continued into Wednesday, and then as the smoke came lower and lower, I found myself struggling to breathe fully, deeply, with an air choked with wildfire smoke drifting inward from Canada. It was one of those experiences that will pass in time, sometime next week or the week after. The air will be cleared and we'll forget that it ever happened. And yet that otherworldly, almost apocalyptic haze stands as a symbol of things happening around the globe today. These wildfires in Canada mirror the ones that are raging in the mountain west of our own country, exacerbated by a historically low snowpack year, the melt of which has been unable to keep the ground wet enough to suppress wildfire until later in the season. There's a heat wave that has been seemingly months long, descending on that is present across Europe, that has led to the deaths of many, people desperately seeking something to cool them off. In our reading of Paul's letters to the Romans, he talks about a creation that is groaning. A creation that is groaning under the weight of death and decay, groaning under the weight of misuse and exploitation by people who seek to use its resources to their own advantage without mind for the detrimental effects that we may have. Even in Paul's own day, there was lament over the loss of the cedars of Lebanon, these great and mighty trees that once dotted the landscape in Lebanon and Israel, that had been over-harvested even by that point some 2,000 years ago in the midst of this decidedly pre-industrial age. Paul could see the signs around him. It was not only the people of Israel who were groaning for a new creation, for something new, for their own salvation and redemption, but creation itself stood in need of renewal and redemption. Paul was no environmentalist. He didn't have any science about global climate change or global warming. He wasn't aware of how human activities and efforts could reshape the movements of wind patterns and the effects of natural disasters. He wasn't aware of any of that. And yet he himself could see this fundamental truth. The creation is groaning. The creation itself, this world that God made, the world that God breathed into existence at the beginning and looked upon it and said, it is good. Itself has been marred. Itself has been damaged. Itself has been exploited by humankind, and stands in need of that same promise of redemption and renewal that Jesus offered to the people of Israel. A renewal and redemption that he promised would be fulfilled, would be made complete in and through the grace of God. The smoky skies that we experienced hanging over us, heat waves across Europe, hurricanes whose effects seem to get worse and worse with each successive year, all of these stand as the sort of tip of a larger iceberg. that iceberg of a changing climate across our globe. Glaciers and polar ice caps that are melting, temperatures that are ticking steadily upwards, natural disasters being exacerbated by increasing emissions around the globe. To look at our global climate systems is to look at a pretty bleak picture. You all have heard the reports, seen the documentaries, heard the news reports, seen the graphs that where temperature just steadily rises, sea level steadily rises, where there isn't a lot of optimism about anything changing direction. Where it seems like maybe the best we could do is to sort of dampen the effects that we're having on the climate and on the world itself. It's a picture that easily leads to despair. It seems like the only direction that it leads towards is the inevitable destruction and damage of our environmental systems, a globe that is less habitable for us and for other creatures, an increasing amount of extinction events happening around the globe, affecting plants, animals, fungi from every clade and taxa. It's a pretty bleak picture. As Paul goes on in this letter, he doesn't end with the groaning of creation. In fact, he goes on to say that the groaning of creation, the experience that God's creation is going through, they're not death throes. It isn't the inevitable destruction of everything that we know and hold dear. Rather, the groaning of creation speaks about a creation that is in the pangs of labor, that is about to give birth to something new. I think that image is essential. Paul could easily have described it as a world that is facing inevitable demise, a world that is just heading downwards towards some kind of apocalyptic collapse. And yet he holds out the possibility of something new. That something is taking shape within and around the people of Israel. Something is taking shape within creation itself, like seeds lying dormant in the ground. That God has promised that in and through that love of God, all things are being made new. That renewal and restoration that creation yearns for is right at hand. If only we can have hope. Hope that things can be otherwise. Hope that there isn't just this inevitable path of decline. Hope that our climatic systems aren't destined for devastation, to be so disrupted that there's no turning back the clock. Hope. That is something that Paul holds dear. Hope. It is something that he knows is possible only in and through faith in God. Hope not in things that are seen. Because if we only have what evidence presents itself to us, it's a pretty bleak picture of humanity, of the world, the global climate of the universe. But rather, hope is for things that are yet unseen. Hope is for things that seem impossible, and yet in and through the love of God are made imminently possible. Paul invites us to have hope for ourselves, hope for humanity as a whole, and hope for creation itself. Hope in God's new creation that can take this world, take this stuff that God breathed into existence, and give into it new life. Not turning back the clock to some prehistoric era in which everything was pristine and perfect, but transforming even this creation that we have done such a good job of messing up into something beautiful, something new, something whole, something in which we can live in harmony with the world around us, in harmony with one another, in peace with our fellow humankind, and in peace with the created world around us. Have hope. That is at the heart of Paul's message. Through all of his discussion about sin and forgiveness, of adoption, of the Spirit, all of it points towards having hope. Hope in God's new creation that has the power to make all things new. a hope that we are brought into and adopted into, a hope that is part of the Spirit that God bestows on each one of us. And that hope isn't an abstract thing. Hope is something that demands action. This week, I was reading about the fate of the Aral Sea, which is one of those great inland lakes, kind of like the Great Salt Lake of our own country, one of those very salinated, also very delicate bodies of water in the world. The Aral Sea is located in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And over the course of the last half century, it went from being the third largest lake in the world to at some point in 2004 completely drying up. The result of decades of terrible agricultural practice, diverting water from one stream to another river being diverted, sent to eventually realize the Soviet utopic vision of cotton growing all across the Eurasian steppe that never came to be. And yet, as the result of conscious effort, of damming certain streams, taking out certain irrigation ditches, in parts of Kazakhstan where the Aral Sea now lives, they're seeing sea levels rise for the first time. Not in the sort of bad, scary polar ice cap melting way, but in a way that signifies some kind of restoration, some kind of return, some kind of hope for the people that look towards an era in which they may fish out of those waters again, in which their forests may grow once again, in which those waters may be restored. Hope. And I look at this community. I look at the actions that we've taken out of a sense of hope, of what is possible for St. George's, but also hope for our world itself. Those solar panels standing out there, those solar panels that you all made possible, are an act of hope. They're an act of believing that we can reverse the impact that we're having on our earth. We can no longer be people who are taking resources from it, burning fossil fuels in order to power our buildings, but can rely on the gift of God's abundant gift of solar energy to power our buildings, to make a statement that we believe that another kind of way of being on this earth is possible, that we desire to be a part of God's new creation in which we live in harmony and in peace with the environment, with the world around us. To do that requires hope. Hope in what is not yet seen, but what is made possible only through the love of God, a love that inspires us to hold out hope that all things can be made new, that all things will be made new, that all things are being made new. May we have the courage to hope for that new creation for ourselves, for our country, for our cities, for humanity as a whole, and most of all, for the whole of God's creation. That creation that is not groaning in its death throes, but that is groaning in labor pains, that is ready, that is eager for God's new creation to be born in and through it, and for us to be a part of it. May we be a people of hope. May that hope be rooted in our faith in God that has been revealed to us in and through the love of Jesus Christ. May we dare to hope that in and through that love, all things are being made new. Amen.